Hi, I'm Talis Moreau, yes, that sister, the one they pretend doesn't exist. I was erased from my own family's story the night my sister called me poison and barred me from her wedding. You'd think that would have broken me. It didn't. It rewired me. I parked 3 spaces away from the venue entrance, not because there wasn't room closer, but because I needed a moment. Just a few more breaths in private. The engine clicked as it cooled. My fingers curled around the ribbon on the gift box sitting on the passenger seat. I'd chosen gold paper with a satin white bow, something neutral, safe, unoffending. Like me, I suppose. I parked 3 spaces away from the venue entrance, not because there wasn't room closer, but because I needed a moment. Just a few more breaths in private. The engine clicked as it cooled. My fingers curled around the ribbon on the gift box sitting on the passenger seat. I'd chosen gold paper with a satin white bow, something neutral, safe, unoffending. Like me, I suppose. The air smelled like jasmine and money. Somewhere inside, someone was laughing in that polite, performative way that people do when cameras are nearby. My heels touched the gravel like I was apologizing for arriving. Every step toward the stone path felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't the weight of the box. It was the weight of everything unspoken packed into it. I told myself to relax. Just go in. Smile. Be the older sister who shows up even when she hasn't been asked to. Be the bigger person. Again. It's just a wedding, I whispered, even though no one was listening. Your family. They'll be glad you came. I reached the gate. The security guard raised a hand. He wasn't rude. Just firm. Name, please? Talis. Talis Moreau. He looked down at the clipboard. Paused. Looked again. I'm sorry. You're not on the list. My breath stopped mid-inhale. Behind him, I heard the soft strings of a quartet playing something from our childhood, Swan Lake. Callista used to pretend she was Odette, twirling in the kitchen, knocking over chairs while my mom clapped like she'd witnessed a miracle. I'd watch from the corner, dish towel in hand, hoping someone might notice I'd folded the napkins into swans too. There must be a mistake, I said. Calm. Controlled. Not letting it show. I was told no exceptions, he replied. I didn't argue. I just stood there, clutching the box like it might anchor me to the ground. Then she came. Callista. White satin, a custom lace veil, flawless makeup that made her look airbrushed in real life. The crowd behind her moved like shadows, people adjusting ties, holding champagne flutes, pretending not to notice the confrontation at the gate. She walked like she owned the gravel beneath her heels. Talis, she said. No smile. Just my name, like a sentence. Callista, I answered. Still calm. Her eyes didn't soften. You taint the air around me. I blinked. Once. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. She said it the way you'd tell a caterer they forgot the gluten-free option. Lethal. Flat. Final. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but my voice didn't make it out. It got stuck somewhere between disbelief and humiliation. The gift box was still in my hands, but it felt like it had tripled in weight. Then I saw them, my parents. Standing just behind her. Vera, with her perfectly pinned hair and cashmere shawl. Silas, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. My mother didn't say a word. She didn't even meet my eyes. She turned slightly, as if the sight of me might disrupt the aesthetic. Let's not make a scene, she muttered, almost kindly. Silas's eyes flickered toward me, briefly. Then he said, almost under his breath, you should have stayed away. They turned and walked back toward the reception. That was it. No defense. No hesitation. No recognition. I wasn't just unwelcome. I was inconvenient. I stood there a few seconds longer. Then I turned around. My heels echoed again, this time sharper. Not tentative. Not begging. The sun had shifted by the time I reached my car. The gift box still looked perfect. Untouched. It mocked me with its elegance. I placed it gently in the passenger seat. Buckled it in like it might still matter to someone. Before starting the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale. Not from embarrassment. From clarity. My phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd made a decision not to remember. Quietly, slowly, I let that truth sink into my ribs like a slow breath. Softly, I whispered, okay. I didn't drive far that night. The roads blurred together, and by the time I turned onto my own street, the streetlights had already flickered on. Their soft hum was the only sound that met me when I stopped the car in front of my porch. I sat there for a while, the engine ticking faintly, watching the porch light blink once before staying solid. There it was, a box sitting neatly by the door. My box. The same gold wrapping, the same white ribbon, the bow untouched. For a second, I thought maybe a neighbor had brought it up from the curb, maybe someone trying to be kind. But as I stepped closer, I saw the small square of paper stuck across the top. This doesn't fit the image we're building. Not, thank you. Not, return to sender. Just that. A sentence written in my mother's neat handwriting, the kind she used for church invitations and Christmas cards. I stared at the note long enough for the porch light to flicker again. Inside, my hands were trembling, not from anger, not even from shock, but from the eerie calm that comes when humiliation finally settles into muscle memory. I put the key in the door, but my hand stalled halfway through the turn. Something in me didn't want to open the door. Not yet. When I finally did, the quiet hit me harder than the insult. The house smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon cleaner, the kind of clean that means no one's been around long enough to mess it up. I placed the box on the counter. I didn't untie it. I didn't even take off my coat. The phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. You know you're not wanted there, right? Just don't escalate it. It was my cousin Lauren. Always neutral, always halfway between empathy and gossip. I stared at her words until the letters blurred, then set the phone face down. Don't escalate it. It was the family motto, really. Never confront. Never disturb. Never make anything visible. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the dim light above the sink. The silverware gleamed like tiny mirrors. My reflection stared back in pieces. I poured a glass of red wine, not to drink, but because I needed something to hold. The hum of the refrigerator was the only thing that sounded alive in the room. I leaned against the counter and looked at the box again. A gift meant for celebration, returned like evidence from a crime I didn't commit. Not a mistake, I murmured to the empty room. A message. I remembered another table. Another room. Years back. We were sitting at dinner, the same kitchen, same light, same silence. Callista had come home from college with photos of Paris, waving her phone like a trophy. My mother leaned forward, smiling in that indulgent way she reserved for the youngest. Oh honey, you look so happy there. So worldly. I'd just gotten a promotion. My first leadership position. I opened my mouth to tell them. Pass the potatoes, my father said without looking up. That was all. No curiosity. No question. Just potatoes. The memory slid into my chest like a dull knife. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. This wasn't new. The wedding was just another verse in the same old song. Back then, I learned that being quiet made them comfortable. That achievement, when spoken by me, sounded like arrogance. So, I swallowed it. Again and again. Until even I forgot the taste of pride. I took another sip of wine and caught myself laughing, not joyfully, but in disbelief. You raised me to be dependable, I said aloud, and then blamed me for being easy to use. The wineglass clinked as I set it down. My hand left a faint print on the counter, a half-moon of condensation. Outside, the streetlight buzzed, steady, soft. My eyes burned from exhaustion. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the unopened gift. The ribbon glowed faintly in the artificial light, mocking me with its perfection. Maybe they didn't mean to hurt me, I thought. Maybe they just didn't care enough not to. I closed my eyes, hearing the faint echo of my sister's voice. You taint the air around me. I'd tried to be what she wasn't. Reliable, careful, invisible when needed. But maybe invisibility is contagious. Once you start erasing yourself for others, they learn to stop seeing you. Softly, I whispered, maybe I did this to myself. I opened my eyes and looked around. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. The house waited, patient, empty. I stood up, went to the fridge, and opened it out of habit. Rows of condiments, a carton of eggs, nothing else. I hadn't bought groceries in a week. I never cooked anymore, too much trouble for one person. It wasn't neglect. It was habit. When you spend years feeding everyone else first, you forget what hunger even feels like. I took another sip of wine and leaned against the counter. The room tilted slightly in the dim light. Not from alcohol, from realization. Every memory lined up neatly, every time they'd needed money, a ride, advice, a loan, an apology. And every time I'd shown up. Without asking for anything in return. That was the role. The fixer. The dependable one. The ghost that keeps the house running. And ghosts don't belong in family photos. The phone buzzed again, another message from Lauren. I ignored it. Instead, I reached for the remote and turned on the small television in the corner of the kitchen. The local news was showing coverage of the wedding. My family smiled, glowing under the fairy lights. I turned it off before my own reflection could catch up to me on the dark screen. I sat back down. The ribbon on the gift caught the faint light and shimmered, perfect as ever. Not thank you, I whispered. Not even sorry. Just branding. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the messages I'd never deleted. Birthday reminders. Hope you're doing well. Miss you, sis. Small, meaningless digital breadcrumbs that pretended to be affection. Then, buried among them, a voicemail I hadn't played before. It was from Vera. A few weeks old. Tallis, please don't make things harder than they already are. Your sisters worked so hard for this moment. Don't show up if you can't be supportive. The words landed softly, almost kindly. That was always her way, polite cruelty disguised as reason. I let out a slow breath. You taught me how to disappear with manners. Quietly, I reached for the ribbon. My fingers hovered, then stopped. No. I wasn't going to open it. I wanted it to stay sealed, a monument to pretense. Instead, I turned away, switched off the kitchen light, and sat in the dark. The outline of the box glowed faintly under the porch light through the window. It looked like it belonged somewhere else. Like I did once. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with unspoken things. I thought of all the dinners, the holidays, the calls I'd waited for. I thought of the times they'd needed me and the times they'd chosen not to see me. And for the first time in years, I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't text. I didn't apologize for existing. I just sat there, breathing, letting the silence fill the space they'd left behind. Gently, quietly, I realized something. They hadn't built this wall alone. I'd handed them the bricks, one compromise at a time. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step, like a wound deciding it no longer wanted to bleed. When I finally stood, my legs felt steady. The box stayed on the table. Unopened. Unneeded. I walked to the drawer by the sink, opened it, and pulled out a folder labeled personal liability. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust. I laid it on the counter and pressed my palm against it, feeling the weight of it anchor me to something real again. The folder was heavier than it looked. I carried it to my desk like it might fight back if I dropped it too fast. The lamp threw a warm circle across the wood, the rest of the room fading into shadow. My office was small, one desk, one chair, one shelf, but it was the only place left in the house that still felt like mine. Inside the folder were old envelopes, folded receipts, and copies of checks, the paper yellowing at the edges. Years of neat handwriting, my handwriting, marking where I'd paid tuition, hospital bills, mortgage installments. I'd labeled everything in thick black ink, family expenses. It looked almost professional, like a small company's accounting file. Except the business I was keeping afloat wasn't a business. It was them. I ran my hand over the pages, the texture soft from being touched too many times. I didn't keep receipts to prove anything, I whispered to the empty room. I kept them because someone had to keep track when no one else cared to. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. I flipped to the oldest page. The first check was for my mother's surgery 15 years ago. The next, Callista's rent during college. The next, ballet classes she didn't even finish. Every number told a story, and every story ended with me paying the bill. I leaned back in my chair. My spine ached. My chest did too. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust. Old promises have that scent, like something meant to last but already decaying. A memory flickered. 5 years ago, we'd sat at that same kitchen table. My father's hand on a stack of documents, the same tone he used for household chores. We need you to co-sign the new mortgage, he'd said. It's just a formality. I'd hesitated. You just refinanced last year. What happened? He shifted in his seat. My mother's lips tightened. Your sister's business idea. It's an investment, she said quickly, as though speed might make it sound responsible. I remember my heartbeat, slow, deliberate. And if it fails? Why do you always think like that? She snapped. You're the one with the stable job. You can help us get approved. Callista didn't say anything. She just smiled, sipping her wine, looking like she'd already won something. I can't, I said finally. The silence that followed was the longest we'd ever shared. Then my mother leaned forward, eyes narrow but voice polite. If you won't help, she said softly, then don't complain when we leave you out of things. That was the first crack. The moment the ground began to shift. From that day on, reliable turned into selfish, and responsible became hard to deal with. I rubbed my forehead, feeling the dull echo of that day. My father's eyes had avoided mine. Callista had changed the subject to her new designer shoes. I'd told myself it didn't matter. I'd told myself they'd understand later. Later never came. Back in the present, the lamp flickered once. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, a list of old voicemails. 8 of them, all from my father. The newest one was 3 years old. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the play button. I wanted to hear his voice, to see if maybe it sounded different in memory. But I didn't press it. I didn't need to. Every word was already stored in my body. You think too much, Tallis. Don't make your mother upset. Your sister's trying, can't you be more supportive? Instead of listening, I deleted them, one by one. Each press of delete was soft, almost gentle. Closure rarely comes loudly. Sometimes it's just the quiet of removing ghosts you no longer need. The last message disappeared. The screen went black. I exhaled slowly. In my mind, scenes overlapped, driving across state lines to deliver medicine when Mom got sick, babysitting for Callista while she went on a weekend trip with her boyfriend, writing her scholarship essays because she was too stressed to think. I had been their invisible infrastructure, the scaffolding no one saw until they were done building. If I'd asked for credit, I'd be accused of needing it, I murmured. So I gave, and shut up. I closed the folder, pressing the edges until the papers lined up perfectly. The act felt ceremonial, like folding a flag after a funeral. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Midnight. The street outside was still, no headlights passing. I stared at the folder again, my mind circling the same question. When did generosity turn into guilt? I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The reflection stared back, same face, same eyes, but harder around the edges. For the first time, I didn't look like someone waiting to be forgiven. In the glass, I saw a version of myself I almost recognized. Someone tired, yes, but still standing. Someone beginning to measure worth differently. I turned off the lamp, but the afterglow stayed for a moment, hovering like a memory. I sat back down. Picked up a pen. On the margin of the folder, I wrote one word in small, deliberate letters, enough. The ink bled slightly into the paper, spreading softly, like water seeping into dry soil. I whispered the word once more, just to hear how it sounded when it belonged to me. Enough. Gently, quietly, the air seemed lighter. I let my hand rest on the page until my pulse steadied. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just done. Healing didn't happen in grand gestures, it arrived in small, careful movements, like this, sitting alone, naming what had already broken and deciding not to fix it this time. The ink from the word enough had barely dried when the first light crept into the kitchen. I hadn't slept. The coffee pot hissed and stuttered behind me, the bitter scent filling the air. I poured a cup, forgot to add sugar, then set it down beside the open folder. The steam rose, gentle and gray. I reached for my phone. News alerts flashed across the screen like warnings. The headline stopped me mid-sip, Callista Vane, the self-made CEO under 30. The words hit like static in my ears. There she was, smiling, perfect, draped in white again, this time on the cover of a business journal. An inspiring story of resilience and innovation, it said. There was a quote from her about family support and sisterhood. My name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I scrolled down, eyes scanning numbers I already knew by heart. The initial funding, the grant proposal, the corporate guarantor, all listed under anonymous private sponsor. That anonymity had a face. Mine. I felt my jaw tighten. My pulse thudded quietly in my ears. They built her image from my silence, I said softly. And I let them. The refrigerator light flickered when I opened the door out of habit. Milk. Nothing else. I let the door close and turned back to the screen. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. Bitterness met bitterness. The folder sat on the table, fat with documents. I opened it again. Inside were the legal papers for Vane Consulting LLC. I had signed every early page, every initial investment. My handwriting looped cleanly along the margins, cautious optimism preserved in ink. I flipped through the pages until I found the clause I'd almost forgotten. It was small, tucked near the bottom. In the event of moral or public defamation, the primary sponsor may revoke name and equity rights without penalty. For a moment, I just stared at it. My name printed in bold at the top, hers listed below as beneficiary. I hadn't realized then how power could hide inside one line of fine print. I traced my finger over the paper. You wanted to own everything, Callista, I whispered. But you forgot who owned the foundation. I turned on my laptop. The blue light illuminated the room, harsh against the morning gray. I logged into the corporate portal, the same account I'd set up 3 years ago. Passwords, recovery codes, all still mine. No one had thought to remove me. I scrolled through the pages of financial records, every number a breadcrumb leading back to me. Then I saw it, a transaction labeled equity conversion, Vane Holdings. The date matched the week after she'd told me she didn't need my help anymore. I remembered that day. She'd called, her voice sugar-sweet. Just sign it. You believe in me, don't you? I had been standing in my office, phone pressed between shoulder and ear, staring at the same lamp that now lit these papers. I do, I'd said. And I did. I believed in her because that's what older sisters are supposed to do, hold the ladder steady while the other one climbs. I signed. 3 months later, she stopped returning calls. When I asked about the business, Mom said, she's busy. Let her shine. You've had your turn. But my turn had never existed. The screen flickered as I clicked through the files. My signature sat there like a ghost, quiet and obedient. I felt the familiar ache in my throat, but it wasn't sadness this time. It was something sharper, cleaner. I clicked the tab labeled Revocation Request. A blank form opened. It waited, patient, expectant. I didn't fill it out yet. Not all the way. Instead, I leaned back, watching the cursor blink like a heartbeat. My reflection in the laptop screen looked foreign, the tired lines under my eyes, the calm that comes after breaking. I thought of my sister's smile on that magazine cover. The carefully curated confidence. The same smile she'd used when she told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding. I closed my eyes and pictured it fading. The lights dimming on her stage. The world seeing what I'd always known, that she built her empire on borrowed faith and forged gratitude. Take me out of the picture, I whispered, and see how well it holds. The words echoed softly in the empty room. The coffee had gone cold again. I didn't warm it up. I liked it that way, honest, bitter, real. I opened my email drafts and attached the clause as a document. I typed her company's legal address in the recipient line but didn't hit send. Not yet. I wanted to hold this moment, the power of having a choice, for just a little longer. Outside, a neighbor's car door slammed. Birds scattered from the tree line. Life went on, unaware of the quiet war being fought in a small kitchen. I stared at the folder again. My handwriting at the top of the first page still looked trusting, naive. That woman didn't exist anymore. Softly, I said it aloud, like a prayer, not today. But soon. The cursor blinked once more. I pressed save. Then, in the silence that followed, my phone began to ring. The sound cut through the still air like glass breaking. I looked at the screen. The name froze me where I stood. Dad. The voice on the other end would be brittle, rehearsed, trembling, the same tone he used whenever he had to choose between truth and peace. And I already knew which one he'd choose. The phone kept ringing. Each vibration rattled against the countertop, steady, insistent, like a clock counting down. I didn't want to answer, but I also knew my father. He would keep calling until I did. Silence, to him, was rebellion. I picked it up on the 4th ring. Dad, I said quietly. The voice that came through was thin, brittle at the edges. If you ruin this wedding, a pause, heavy with warning, you're dead to me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm made it worse. It was the kind of tone used to scold a child who should already know better. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, hoping I'd misheard. Excuse me? He sighed, long and weary. Your mother's worked herself sick for this day. Your sister's finally turning her life around. Don't make this about you. About me? I repeated, the words catching on a dry laugh. I wasn't even invited, Dad. Callista said you tried to interfere. His voice stiffened. You don't show up to someone's big moment and air grievances. It's low. The words hit like cold rain. I didn't show up to ruin anything, I said. I showed up to bring a gift. That's all. A pause. Then, softly, you should have stayed away. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but cleanly, like ice splitting on a lake. Dead to you, I repeated, testing the phrase in my mouth. You know, I think I've been dead to you for years. Talus. But I hung up before he could find another sentence that sounded like love but meant obedience. The phone slid from my hand, landing softly on the couch cushion. My fingers trembled, but not from fear. The tremor came from release, the aftershock of realizing I no longer had to explain myself. I looked around the room. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, turning everything gold except the family photographs on the shelf. I'd turned them face down weeks ago. Now they looked like gravestones. Quietly, slowly, I stood up and crossed to the desk where my laptop still glowed. The file was already open, waiting. Vain Holdings, revocation clause. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the form. I hovered over the word submit. They'd always told me I was too cautious. That I thought too much before acting. My mother said it like a flaw, my father said it like an apology. But thinking had kept me sane in a family addicted to denial. I moved the mouse, steady this time. Let's see what happens when the erased one speaks, I whispered. Click. The screen refreshed, the confirmation message flashing in bright green, request successfully submitted. Timestamped. Irrevocable. The quiet afterward wasn't empty. It was solid, like ground finally forming under my feet. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, breathing through the wave that followed. There wasn't triumph. There wasn't guilt. Just a clean, still space where fear used to live. They think I'll show up with tears or vengeance, I murmured. I won't show up at all. I opened my eyes and looked at the folder lying beside me. Each page inside represented another piece of the story they'd rewritten without me. I traced the edges of the paper with one finger. They never read the fine print, I said softly. They never thought I'd remember what I signed. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was sinking behind the rooftops. Somewhere out there, they were probably rehearsing dinner speeches, perfecting smiles, pretending everything was fine. I could picture my mother instructing the florist in her gentle but absolute tone. No lilies, they're too somber. I could hear my father's nervous laugh, covering discomfort with charm. You know women, always overdo it. And Callista, sipping champagne, feigning humility while the photographer adjusted the lighting. They would talk about legacy, family, resilience. They'd toast to second chances. And all the while, the ground beneath their perfect stage would begin to shift, quietly, legally, inevitably. I sat back down, fingers grazing the keyboard. There was an ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes after holding back too much for too long. I let it come. I didn't fight it. The memories returned in fragments, the Christmas I paid for, the mortgage payment they forgot, the excuses that sounded like gratitude but weren't. Every favor, every silence, every apology that bought me nothing but distance. I thought of my father's voice again, trembling but firm. You're dead to me. Good, I thought. I've been mourning you for years. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. The light through the blinds had faded to a soft amber. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper. I realized I hadn't eaten all day. I wasn't hungry. The feeling in my stomach was something else, something steadier. Relief. They'd built a world where silence meant loyalty. I'd just rewritten the rules. I reached for the coffee mug from that morning. Cold again. It didn't matter. I drank it anyway. The bitterness grounded me. Outside, the first streetlights flickered on. I walked to the mirror by the hall. The woman staring back wasn't the version they'd made of me, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the ghost who kept records and never demanded her name be remembered. This version had edges. I'm done proving I belong, I whispered. The phone buzzed again on the counter. I didn't look. I knew the pattern: call, voicemail, guilt, apology, denial. The family rhythm I'd danced to for decades. Tonight, the music had stopped. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the street lamp outside. The house felt smaller, but it was finally mine. I sat on the couch, the silence thick around me. Somewhere, far away, wedding bells would soon ring. Cameras would flash. Guests would clap. And then, maybe an hour later, the first alert would come through. A financial freeze. A revoked clause. A ripple that would reach every account tied to her name. Not vengeance. Just balance. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I didn't ruin anything, I said into the quiet. I just stopped keeping their secrets. The air in the room felt lighter. Still heavy with truth, but breathable. Gently, I folded my hands in my lap. Softly, I let out a breath that had been waiting for years. By the time dusk settled, the house was quiet. I sat in the same chair, watching the light outside fade from gold to silver. The phone was silent now. No more calls. No messages. Just the hum of stillness before something breaks. Somewhere across town, champagne glasses were being filled, laughter spilling like an old lie that never stopped sounding polite. I pictured it all without trying: Callista's wedding reception, the chandeliers, the endless floral centerpieces, the practiced joy. It was easy to imagine because I'd lived my life furnishing their scenes. But this time, I wasn't in the picture. The evening stretched on, soft and deliberate. I leaned back, staring at the faint reflection of my own outline on the dark window. Then my laptop blinked, a notification, confirmation that the legal document had been processed. One email. One sentence. The revocation clause has been activated. I closed the screen. Somewhere in that perfect ballroom, a foundation had just cracked. At Rosemont Estate, the air smelled of roses and money. Guests were seated beneath glittering lights, the string band drifting into another polished melody. My mother was smiling again, rehearsed and camera-ready. My father stood beside her, a drink in his hand, telling anyone who would listen, "We're so proud." And then the MC's voice filled the room. A special video from the bride, her journey, her triumph, her family's support. Applause. Phones lifted to record. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life. But it wasn't the right file. The first slide flickered, then stabilized. White letters on a black background, Vane Holdings, initial funding record. The jazz music faltered. Murmurs rippled. The next slide came fast, bank statements, wire transfers, contracts scrolling across the screen. My name in black ink at the top of each page. Primary guarantor, Talis Moreau. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then gasps. The sound of glass slipping from someone's hand, the faint crack of a champagne flute hitting marble. I wasn't there, but I could see it. Every detail. My mother clutching her pearls, my father whispering, "Turn it off, turn it off." And Callista, her face draining, steps quickening as she stormed toward the AV booth, shouting, "That's not supposed to be there. Stop it now." But the video kept rolling. It froze on the last page, the clause in bold type, "Any public ethical breach shall void sponsorship." My signature just below. Hers beneath mine. The MC stammered, technical difficulties, folks," but no one laughed. No one spoke. I imagine her voice cracking, her panic leaking through the perfect facade. "Who did this?" she must have screamed, the lace on her dress trembling with her breath. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Is that her sister's name?" Another voice, "Guess family really does build success." Silence followed, thick as smoke. Then, amid the chaos, a woman stood. Small frame, dark dress, shaking hands. Marla Quinn. My old accountant, the one who disappeared after Callista took over. She walked straight to the microphone. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I was paid to lie," she said. "But lies don't sleep easy." The room shifted. Heads turned. "She didn't build this alone," Marla continued. "And when she tried to erase Talis, she had to erase me too. I won't stay erased." My father tried to move toward her, but Vera's hand stopped him. Her nails dug into his sleeve. "Don't make it worse," she hissed under her breath. But it was already worse. The next file flashed onto the screen. 2 documents side by side. One authentic, one forged. The difference was small, a curve in the letter T, a spacing in the signature line, but unmistakable. The projector light flickered, reflecting off Callista's pale face. "That's not," she started, but her voice broke. The silence that followed wasn't mercy. It was judgment. Someone whispered, forgery's a felony, isn't it? Another voice answered, guess money makes people forget laws. The band had stopped playing. The hum of expensive lighting filled the room. No one knew where to look. Back home, I sat in the half-dark, the scene playing in my mind like a film I hadn't meant to direct. My heart wasn't racing. It moved in slow, even beats. I wasn't invited, I whispered to the quiet, but my name got there first. And it spoke louder than their silence ever did. I could almost hear the rest, the crash of glasses, the hurried exit of guests trying not to be seen, the sound of my mother's voice breaking for the first time in years. The screen at the estate finally went black. The band didn't resume. The waitstaff didn't move. Then Marla's voice again, softer now, truth doesn't vanish just because you're uncomfortable. Outside the estate, the air had turned cold. The sky hung heavy, clouds swallowing the last light. Cars began to leave, one by one, taillights fading like small apologies in the dark. Inside, Callista stood frozen, veil askew, makeup streaking down her cheek. My father avoided her eyes. My mother whispered something sharp that no one caught. And still, no one clapped. No one toasted. Some truths don't need celebration. They only need witnesses. Hours later, when the guests had gone and the music never resumed, I closed my laptop and stared at the blank wall in front of me. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. Justice doesn't roar. It hums. Quiet, steady, undeniable. I thought of Marla's courage, the way she must have looked standing there alone. Of how the sound of paper sliding into the light can sometimes be louder than any argument. They had written me out of their story, but the ink I left behind had the final word. The clock ticked toward midnight. I leaned back, listening to the stillness. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. Gently, I let the thought settle. Some truths, I whispered, don't need a punchline. They just leave a crater where a fantasy used to stand. Outside, a single car passed, its headlights brushing across the wall like a sigh. Softly, I closed the laptop. By the time the sun climbed back up, the world had already shifted. Not enough to topple anything instantly, but enough to make the hinges creak. I sat with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at my laptop. The notifications were flooding in, emails, text messages, missed calls from numbers I didn't save anymore. My name wasn't trending. But hers was. The hashtags pulsed through every feed, she was there first, the forgotten sister, Vain Gate. I hadn't posted a single word. And yet, I was suddenly the headline they hadn't rehearsed for. I thought I'd feel vindicated. I thought the ache would ease. But when everything you ever wanted boils down to someone else being exposed, the triumph is quieter than you expect. It settles, like dust, not victory. Then, I saw it. The video. Callista's account. A glossy thumbnail, her face framed in perfect lighting, lips slightly parted, eyes rimmed in pink. She'd filmed it in her guest bedroom, no doubt, always the curated intimacy. Family betrayal and mental health, my truth. I clicked play. She looked straight into the camera. Her voice was soft, tearful. I never wanted this to be public. I wanted a quiet, joyful celebration. But sometimes, when people are hurting, they lash out. My sister. She's always resented me. I don't blame her. She's had her struggles. But this wasn't how I thought it would end. She paused for effect. A practiced pause. The kind that waits for sympathy to fill the gap. I tried to include her. But she's unstable. I wish she had sought help instead of destroying everything. My hands curled into fists in my lap. The coffee grew colder. She didn't mention the fake contracts. She didn't mention the clause. She didn't even deny the documents. She just reframed it. Spun it. Rewrote the narrative. She's fragile, Callista said again, her voice catching. But I still love her. I just have to protect myself now. The video ended. A flood of comments already rolled beneath it. She just wanted a peaceful wedding. Poor Callista, she's always been the stronger one. I knew there was something off about the older sister. I stared at the screen. Not because it shocked me, but because of how expected it was. She didn't need truth. She had timing, lighting, sympathy. The comments were like pebbles thrown at a window. Each one small. Each one unnecessary. But together, they formed a pattern. You made us uncomfortable by showing up. Not angry yet. Just still. The box on my counter still sat unopened. That gold paper now seemed ironic. I hadn't touched it since the night of the wedding. I wasn't going to. I got up, rinsed my mug, and wiped down the counter with the edge of my sleeve. Habit, more than anything. Then, my phone buzzed again. A voice message. From Delia. I pressed play. Hi Aunt Tallis. I saw you on TikTok. My friend's mom said you were very brave. And I told my class you're the bravest person I know. Mommy says we don't have to choose sides. But I choose you. Silence. Then a giggle. Okay, bye. I sank into the chair slowly, holding the phone to my chest like it could slow my heartbeat. She chose me. Not out of guilt. Not out of manipulation. Out of knowing. A child who saw clearer than adults ever bothered to. Tears didn't fall like a flood. They arrived the way grief often does, in quiet tremors beneath the surface. I let them come, gently, without wiping them away. She chose me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the supporting role. I wasn't the prop in someone else's story. I was hers. She built her empire on image, I whispered. I built my silence into steel. And this message from a child, is heavier than her spotlight. I stood, finally, and returned to my laptop. I didn't post a response. I didn't defend myself. I didn't clap back. I opened the legal document again. The revocation clause. I copied the summary, attached the certified evidence, and drafted a clean, emotionless email to the primary investors in Callista's company. Subject line, disclosure regarding Vane Holdings, compliance breach. No frills. No anger. Just the truth. I reread it once. Then I hit send. I didn't refresh the inbox. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need followers. It just needs to stand long enough for masks to melt. The sun outside had moved behind the trees. A soft glow filtered through the blinds, painting everything gold again. I sat back, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket. My father hadn't called since. My mother had posted nothing. The family thread had gone quiet. I didn't expect anyone to knock on my door with an apology. But now, I didn't need one. What Delia gave me was better than vindication. She gave me a place. And even if the world tried to spin my story, I finally knew the weight of my own. Quietly, I closed the email tab and stood. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step, in the spaces between what they took and what I chose to reclaim. Rain pressed softly against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the pulse beneath my skin. Morning had arrived muted and gray, the kind of light that doesn't promise anything, just exists. I sat at my desk, blinds half drawn, a half-empty mug beside the keyboard. The email draft blinked back at me, already loaded with attachments, contracts, timestamps, signatures, every quiet piece of evidence that had been ignored until now. My cursor hovered above send. The subject line read, violation of financial ethics clause, Callista Vane Holdings. I read it once more. No typos. No anger in the tone. Just precision. The sort of email that doesn't ask for justice, only balance. I didn't light the match, I murmured, voice barely above a whisper. I just stopped shielding them from the fire. I hit send. The sound of the rain deepened. I closed my eyes, listening to it tap against the glass. For the first time in weeks, there was no shaking in my hands. Days slipped by quietly, as they tend to after something irreversible. Each morning began the same way, coffee, news, silence. On the third day, my inbox filled with articles. Startup darling accused of contract fraud. Legal questions mount around tech influencer Callista Vane. Vane Holdings under review after document leak. Her face was still everywhere, but the smile had changed. It looked strained now, cornered. The comments below the headlines told their own story, disbelief, pity, outrage. People who once called her brilliant now called her reckless. The investors moved quickly. Funding frozen. Public appearances cancelled. One press conference postponed indefinitely. Then came the statement from her fiancé, short and polished, "We have ended our engagement. I wish her the best." It was always the same phrasing when someone fell from grace. Clean. Detached. Polite. I didn't smile. Justice rarely feels like joy, it feels like air you forgot how to breathe. In the quiet between headlines, I found myself thinking of that wedding day. The gate. The guard's polite apology. The violin music. I remembered the moment the projector flickered, how half the guests had risen and walked out, their heels clicking in unison, like a single heartbeat of conscience. I could almost see Vera's hand clutching her clutch tighter, her voice sharp with command, "Everyone sit down. There's been a mistake." And Silas, my father, frozen in place, watching his perfect family unravel. Somewhere in that chaos, a child had clapped. Just once. Maybe not in approval, maybe just because she didn't understand the rules yet. But that sound, small and honest, had split the silence wider than any accusation could. That sound stayed with me. It still does. Now, every time a new article appeared, I didn't feel pride. I felt that same soft clap echoing, reminding me this wasn't revenge, it was correction. By the fifth day, her social media vanished. The accounts went private, then disappeared altogether. The last thing she posted was a black square. No caption, no context, no apology. Just darkness. "When your kingdom's made of mirrors," I whispered, "the first crack shows everything." Her friends stopped calling me. Some had tried, early on, to offer sympathy that sounded rehearsed. No one saw this coming. Families are complicated. She's under so much pressure. I didn't respond. Some silences are answers in themselves. A week later, an email arrived from one of the former investors. It was only one sentence long: "Thank you for your integrity." No signature, no closing. Just that. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood up, and stretched my arms. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I made another cup of coffee, this time drinking it while it was still warm. Outside, the street shimmered faintly, reflections of houses bending in the puddles. My breath fogged against the glass. Everything looked softer in the gray light, almost forgiving. I'd spent so many years wanting them to see me, to recognize what I'd done, what I'd carried. But now I understood, the absence of recognition was its own freedom. They no longer held my name hostage. The phone rang once that afternoon. I didn't check who it was. I already knew the pattern, calls when the consequences began to settle in. My mother would want to explain, my father would talk about family unity, Callista would sob through some variation of "you went too far." But I had nothing left to say. I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped outside. The drizzle met my skin like forgiveness. The garden smelled of wet soil and the faint sweetness of old hydrangeas. For a moment, I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who sent money without being asked, who took blame to keep the peace, who stood at gates with gifts that no one wanted. She had done her best. And now, she was done. The air was cool, sharp, honest. Inside, my phone buzzed again. I let it ring. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. It just exists, like a steady tide after the storm pulls back. I looked up, watching a single leaf fall slowly, spiraling to the ground. Quietly, I thought, they built a story without me, but I lived a life without them. When I went back inside, the laptop screen had dimmed. I left it that way. No new emails. No new fires to put out. I poured another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, letting the warmth reach my hands. Outside, the world kept turning, unaware that something fragile had finally broken cleanly enough to heal. Autumn came quietly, the way forgiveness sometimes does, without ceremony, without warning. The mornings carried that familiar chill that makes coffee taste more like comfort than habit. I didn't plan to go anywhere special that day. It was just a Saturday. I wanted air, people, a glimpse of life that didn't revolve around loss or memory. Downtown Charlotte buzzed with its weekend rhythm. The farmers' market stretched along the square, stalls lined with jars of honey, woven scarves, baked bread. Children ran past with painted faces, the scent of kettle corn and cinnamon drifting through the air. I walked slowly, scarf pulled close, watching couples share laughter over paper cups of cider. I didn't come here to look for her. But there she was. The booth was small, tucked between a flower stand and a used book vendor. The banner above it read Natural Glow Skincare, the lettering faded and a little uneven. And behind the table stood Callista. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair, once styled into effortless perfection, was tied back loosely. The designer heels had been replaced by worn flats. Her eyes darted to every customer that passed, hopeful but tired. When she saw me, something in her expression froze, like she was trying to decide if I was real or another consequence. I stepped closer, picking up a small jar from the front row. The label was printed off-center, the font amateur. It smelled faintly of lavender and effort. She blinked twice, trying to compose herself. "We have a special, buy 2, get 1 free." Her voice was soft, fragile, rehearsed. I looked down at the jar, then at her. "No, thank you. I'll just take this one." I reached for my wallet, handing her cash. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. As she reached for a bag, I said it, calmly, clearly, not cruel. "This one I bought. Like everything I ever gave you." Her hand stopped midair. The bag rustled between us, caught on the weight of what wasn't being said. She didn't reply. Didn't need to. Her eyes dropped to the table, and for the first time, she looked small. I placed the jar in my coat pocket, nodded once, and walked away. My steps were steady, not rushed. Behind me, I heard her murmur something, maybe my name, maybe nothing at all. The air outside the market was crisp. I found a bench near the fountain and sat, letting the sounds of the city fold around me, car horns, laughter, the faint strum of a street musician's guitar. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. What I felt was distance, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. A year had passed since everything burned down, and yet I wasn't haunted by ashes. The quiet I'd built wasn't empty, it was full of space to breathe. Later that month, I was invited to speak at a conference in Raleigh, an event for therapists, counselors, and those who'd lived through families that looked functional from the outside. I almost said no. Talking about it meant reopening something I'd finally sealed. But something inside me said go. The auditorium was modest, maybe 200 people, all seated in that patient way of people who know pain when they see it. The stage lights were soft, warm. My notes were minimal. I didn't need to rehearse the truth anymore. I stepped to the podium, microphone humming faintly. "Some of us," I began, "weren't uninvited. We were never meant to exist in their story." A few heads nodded. "So we built a new one. One where we weren't erased, just revised." The room was still. Then came the applause, gentle, slow, sincere. No standing ovation, no spotlight. Just understanding. When I walked off stage, a woman near the aisle caught my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "You said what I couldn't." I smiled. Quietly. "Then we're both free, aren't we?" Outside, the sky was bruised with twilight. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from a nearby bakery. I stopped by the window, the same kind of window where, years ago, I once watched my family laugh without me. The scent didn't sting anymore. It reminded me that sweetness can survive without ownership. As I walked toward the parking lot, I thought about everything I used to crave: apologies, recognition, explanations. They no longer fit. Forgiveness isn't owed. Closure isn't begged for. Sometimes the only apology you ever get is the silence that follows your absence. When I got home, night had settled soft across the neighborhood. The porch light clicked on automatically. I took off my coat, hung it by the door, and reached into my pocket. The lavender jar from the market glimmered faintly under the kitchen light. I placed it on the shelf above the sink. Not as a trophy. Not as a reminder of her failure. Just as an artifact from a story that finally found its ending. Even gifts taken back don't define worth. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the leaves drift across the street, slow and weightless. My reflection stared back, tired, yes, but peaceful. I wasn't asking to be seen anymore. I had finally seen myself. Softly, I exhaled. The steam from my tea rose like breath returning to a body that had waited too long. The house was silent, but not lonely. Sometimes, the people who silence you the most share your last name. And sometimes, healing doesn't come with an apology, but with the decision to stop waiting for one. What would you do if your own family erased you from their story? Would you walk away or rewrite the ending? If this story stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Your voice matters here.